The rust never slept on Hephaestus Station. A fat, ugly tick of a mining rig latched onto the iron-rich Asteroid 16 Psyche, and neither did Elias Thorne. He tasted copper on his tongue, the same taste that clung to the recycled air and the protein paste he'd had for his morning meal, the metallic tang of a life spent chewing on the gristle of the void. His knuckles were scarred from 1,000 slips of a wrench, his eyes accustomed to the dim glow of emergency lighting and the stark, unforgiving glare of welding torches. He was a junker, a mechanic, a glorified grease monkey keeping the station's heart from seizing up. A heart that beat in the slow, rhythmic crunch of the ore processors that chewed rock day and night, grinding fortunes for a corporation back on an Earth he hadn't seen in 20 years. His world was a cacophony of groaning metal, hissing hydraulics, and the low hum of the life support that separated his crew of 12 from the silent, killing vacuum just a few inches of cheap plasteel away. He was crawling through a maintenance duct, the cold of the asteroid's core seeping through the thin metal into his bones, when the screaming started. It wasn't the shriek of tearing metal or a pressure alarm. It was human. A raw, ragged sound that clawed its way through the station's comm system, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Elias froze, his mag clamp wrench hovering over a corroded power conduit, and listened. The voice belonged to Anya, the rig's geologist, a woman whose calm demeanor was as solid as the asteroid itself, but now her voice was a shredded ribbon of panic, laced with something else, something that sounded like horrified disbelief. "It's not stopping," she shrieked, the words distorted by static and her own hyperventilating gasps. "God, it's coming through the walls. It's not metal. It's alive. Oh, God. Elias, it's—" The transmission cut out, replaced by a wet, statistical hiss that was somehow more terrifying than the scream. Elias scrambled back out of the duct, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He dropped onto the grated floor of the engineering deck, the silence of the rig suddenly deafening, the familiar crunch of the ore processors having fallen ominously still. "Anya," he yelled into his personal comm, his voice rough. "What's going on, report?" Only the hiss answered. He saw Yorick, the hulking foreman, lumbering out of the control room, his face pale beneath his thick beard, his eyes wide with a fear Elias had never seen in the man. "Comms are dead," Yorick grunted, his voice a low rumble of anxiety. "All channels. The long-range array just went dark, and the processors shut down on their own." Elias felt a cold dread snake its way up his spine. Systems didn't just shut down, not all at once. He ran for the control room, Jorik at his heels, his boots clanging on the metal deck. The room was bathed in the red glow of emergency alerts flashing across every monitor. Outside the main viewport, space was its usual black, indifferent self, sprinkled with the distant, cold diamonds of stars. But something was wrong. The external camera feeds were glitching, showing distorted images of the station's hull, and as Elias watched, a patch of the plasteel plating began to shimmer, to writhe as if it were alive. It wasn't a reflection, it was the metal itself. A black, iridescent sheen was spreading across the station's exterior like an oil slick, a creeping plague of liquid darkness that consumed the dull gray of the hull. As it spread, the metal beneath it seemed to soften, to lose its solid form, bulging and contorting in unnatural ways. "What in the hell is that?" Jorik whispered, his voice trembling. Before Elias could answer, a percussive bang echoed through the station, and one of the smaller viewports in the mess hall, shown on a security feed, cracked. But it didn't shatter outward. It was pushed inward, slowly, as if by a great, unseen pressure. Through the fracturing plasteel, the black substance oozed, not like a liquid, but like a colony of microscopic insects, a river of living darkness. It flowed down the wall, and as it touched the floor, the metal deck beneath it began to ripple and change, sprouting thin, black tendrils that twisted and grew with horrifying speed. Then they heard another scream, this one from the medbay. It was Dr. Eris. A short, sharp cry of pain that was cut off abruptly. The medbay camera feed showed the black tendrils snaking across the floor, climbing up the legs of a medical gurney, and wrapping around Eris's ankle. He had tried to pull away, but the tendril held fast, and then more tendrils joined it, swarming up his leg, their touch causing the fabric of his jumpsuit to smoke and dissolve. The man didn't even have time to scream again before he was engulfed, his body convulsing violently as the black substance seemed to merge with his flesh, his form distorting, bones snapping and reforming under the shimmering black sheath. In seconds, he was no longer human. He was a grotesque parody, a twitching, lurching puppet of black, shimmering sinew, its head lolling at an impossible angle as it began to shamble towards the camera. Elias felt a wave of nausea wash over him. This wasn't an attack. This was a violation, an assimilation. They weren't being conquered. They were being rewritten. Seal the control room, Elias barked, the order tearing itself from his throat, pure instinct taking over where conscious thought had failed. Now, Yorick slammed his hand on the emergency lockdown panel, and a thick metal blast door hissed shut, its magnetic locks thudding into place. They were trapped, but for a moment, they were safe. They watched in silent horror as the security feeds showed the rest of the station being consumed. They saw crew members run, fight back with plasma cutters and rivet guns, their makeshift weapons proving useless as the black tide swarmed over them, transforming them into the same twitching horrors. The station itself was groaning, the very structure of it changing as the alien substance reinforced some sections and dissolved others, reshaping their home into something monstrous and alien. The creatures that had once been their friends began to move with a shared, terrifying purpose, their shambling gait becoming more coordinated, their movements sharp and precise. They were a hive mind, a single organism wearing the flesh of his crew. Elias's mind raced, sifting through the terror to find a solution, a weapon, anything. They couldn't fight this thing. It wasn't just an enemy, it was a force of nature, a plague that turned their own technology and their own bodies against them. Their only hope was to run. The ore hauler, Elias said, his voice low and urgent. The stray dog. It's docked at Bay 3. It's an independent vessel. Separate life support. Its own power core. If we can get to it, we might be able to detach before this thing gets to its systems. Jorik nodded, his face grim. Bay 3 is on the other side of the rig. We'd have to go through the main corridor. As if on cue, a heavy thud slammed against the blast door. Then another, and another. They were coming for them. The rhythmic pounding was the sound of their former crewmates, their bodies turned into battering rams by the alien intelligence. A thin, black line appeared at the edge of the sealed door, the alien nanites trying to ooze through the microscopic gap, trying to dissolve the very metal that was keeping them out. "There's another way," Elias said, his eyes darting to a schematic on one of the still-functioning monitors. "Through the old mining shafts, the ones we sealed off last year. They run right under the main corridor and come out near the cargo bays." It was a crazy gamble. The shafts were unstable, unlit, and partially flooded with toxic coolant. But it was their only chance. "Get the emergency supplies," Elias ordered, grabbing a plasma cutter from the tool locker, "and anything that can be used as a weapon." They worked in frantic silence, the pounding on the door growing louder, more insistent. Yorick stuffed ration packs, water filters, and medkits into a duffel bag, while Elias checked the charge on 2 heavy-duty rivet guns. They're sharp, metal projectiles designed to punch through rock and, hopefully, through corrupted flesh. With a final, ear-splitting screech, the blast door began to buckle inward, the metal glowing red as the nanites worked their dissolving magic. "Time to go," Elias growled, kicking open a floor panel that concealed the entrance to the old shafts. A gust of foul, chemical-smelling air rushed up to meet them. He didn't hesitate. He swung his legs into the darkness and dropped, landing with a splash in a foot of viscous, foul-smelling liquid. Jorik followed, his large frame barely squeezing through the opening before he dropped down beside Elias, pulling the panel shut above them just as the control room door burst open with a shower of molten sparks. They were plunged into absolute darkness. The only sounds the drip of coolant from the ceiling and their own ragged breathing. Elias switched on the lamp on his helmet, its beam cutting a narrow, wavering path through the oppressive blackness. The shaft was a narrow, claustrophobic tunnel carved directly out of the asteroid's rock, reinforced with rusting iron beams. The air was thick with the stench of decay and chemicals. They began to move, wading through the toxic sludge, the rivet guns held ready. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the distant, muffled sounds of the station being torn apart above them. They passed side tunnels and dark alcoves, every shadow a potential threat. Elias felt a constant naked crawling sensation on his skin, the paranoia of the unseen enemy. This wasn't war. This was a nightmare. After what felt like an eternity of sloshing through the dark, they found the access ladder that led up to the cargo bay level. Elias climbed first, pushing open the ceiling hatch with a grunt. He poked his head out, his rivet gun sweeping the area. The cargo bay was dark, the only light coming from the flickering emergency strobes that cast long, dancing shadows. The air was filled with the coppery scent of blood and the strange, ozone-like smell of the alien substance. The bay was a wreck. Cargo containers were overturned. Equipment was smashed. And black, pulsating veins of the alien material pulsed on the walls and ceiling. And in the center of the bay, 3 of the creatures that had once been their crewmates stood motionless, as if waiting. They turned their heads in unison as the hatch opened, their movements perfectly synchronized, their faces blank masks of shimmering black, devoid of eyes or any recognizable features. A low clicking sound emanated from them, a sound that vibrated in Elias's teeth, a sound of alien thought, of a hive mind focusing its attention. He didn't think. He just reacted. "Jorik, now!" he yelled, opening fire with the rivet gun. The weapon bucked in his hands, spitting a stream of white-hot metal spikes. The rivets punched into the lead creature, the impacts creating small explosions of black ichor. But the thing barely flinched. It staggered back, but its wounds sealed over almost instantly. the black substance flowing like liquid mercury to repair the damage. Yorick scrambled out of the hatch, his own rivet gun roaring to life. Together, they unleashed a relentless barrage, driving the creatures back. The sheer kinetic force of the impacts tearing chunks of corrupted flesh from their bodies faster than they could regenerate. One of the creatures lunged, its arm elongating into a sharp, black blade. Elias sidestepped, the blade hissing past his face, and fired a point-blank burst into its torso, the force of the impact sending the creature stumbling into a stack of volatile fuel cells. The resulting explosion was deafening, a flash of brilliant white light that vaporized the creature and sent a shockwave tearing through the bay. The other two were momentarily stunned by the blast, and Elias and Yorick seized the opportunity. "The stray dog!" Elias shouted over the ringing in his ears. "Go!" They sprinted across the bay, leaping over debris and the still twitching remains of their former friends. The stray dog was a small, ugly ship, more engine than anything else, its hull scarred and pitted from countless journeys through asteroid fields. But to Elias, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He slammed his hand on the ramp control, and with a hydraulic hiss, the ramp lowered. They scrambled aboard, and Elias ran for the cockpit, his fingers flying across the pre-flight checklist, his muscle memory from years of flying junk heaps like this one taking over. "Yorick, seal the ramp and get on the comms," Elias yelled, his eyes glued to the monitors. "Try to raise anyone, anything Solcom, any military channels. I don't care." He fired up the engines, the old fusion core rumbling to life with a comforting roar. Through the cockpit's viewport, he could see more of the creatures pouring into the cargo bay, their movements faster now, more aggressive. He toggled the docking clamp's release. With a series of loud bangs, the stray dog broke free from Hephaestus Station. Elias pushed the throttle forward, and the small ship surged out of the docking bay, away from the dying, corrupted station. As they cleared the rig, he got a full view of what had become of their home. Hephaestus Station was no longer a machine. It was a living, breathing monstrosity, a cancerous growth of black, pulsating flesh and twisted metal, a tomb for 11 good people. A cold, hard fury settled in Elias's chest, a rage so pure and so deep it burned away the terror and left behind something cold and sharp as a shard of ice. He looked at the coordinates flashing on his nav computer, the course already plotted for the nearest human outpost, a small colony on Titan. They had to warn them. They had to tell them what was coming. The Vex, the Reapers, the Scourge. He didn't know what to call them, and he didn't care. They had taken his crew, his home, and they had turned them into abominations. He would not let them do it to anyone else. His knuckles were white as he gripped the controls, the ship accelerating into the vast, lonely darkness of space. He was just a mechanic, a junker from the ass end of the system. But he had seen the face of the enemy, and he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not run. He would fight, and he would show this silent, creeping horror what it meant to try and consume humanity. The war had started not with a bang, but with a scream in the dark, and Elias Thorne would make sure the universe heard his answer. The silence inside the stray dog was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered the low thrum of the engines and the frantic beat of Elias's own heart. He and Yorick had been flying for hours, the asteroid belt a receding field of gray ghosts in their wake, the corrupted, monstrous form of Hephaestus Station, a burning ember of memory seared into the backs of their eyelids. Yorick sat in the co-pilot seat, his massive hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on his knees, his gaze fixed on the endless black outside the viewport. He hadn't spoken a word since they'd escaped, his face a mask of shock and grief. Elias understood. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Anya's face, heard Dr. Aris's scream, saw the grotesque, twitching puppets their friends had become. The rage was still there, a cold, hard knot in his gut, but it was now overlaid with the crushing weight of responsibility. They were the only ones who knew. They were the warning. He toggled the comms panel, the console spitting a shower of orange sparks. The stray dog was a rust bucket, its systems a patchwork of bypassed circuits and salvaged parts he'd installed himself over the years. The long-range comm is shot, he grunted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The power relay is fried. I might be able to rig a bypass, but it'll be like screaming into a hurricane. We'll be lucky if anyone even hears us. Yorick finally stirred, turning his head slowly, his eyes hollow. They have to hear us. Eli, Titan, the colony. There are kids there, families. His voice was a raw, broken thing. We saw what it did. We can't let that happen to them. Elias nodded, his jaw tight. I know. He unstrapped himself from the pilot's chair and moved to a service panel behind the cockpit, pulling it open to reveal a tangled nest of wires and conduits. But a panicked message from a beat-up ore hauler isn't going to make anyone listen. They'll think we're pirates or crazy. We need proof. He began to work, his hands moving with the sure, steady confidence of a man who understood machinery better than he understood people. While you were grabbing the supplies, he said, not looking up from his work, I jacked into the station's central data core, managed to pull the last 10 minutes of the security logs before the whole system was eaten. Yorick's eyes widened. You got it. You got the footage. Elias pulled a small, rugged data chip from his pocket and tossed it to the big man. Everything. The black stuff on the hull. Anya's last transmission. The mess hall. Aris in the medbay. It's all there. He paused, his hands still for a moment. It's not pretty. Jork stared at the chip in his palm as if it were a venomous insect. That small piece of plastic held the last moments of their friends, a recording of their own personal apocalypse. He closed his fist around it, the sharp edges digging into his skin. Good, he rumbled, a dangerous fire flickering in his eyes. Let him see. Let the whole damn system see what these things are. Elias went back to work, his focus absolute. He stripped wires with his teeth, rerouted power from the ship's non-essential systems, and jury-rigged a crude but powerful amplifier for the comms array, the ship's lights flickering and dimming as he diverted the energy. It was a dangerous, unstable fix, but it was their only shot. After an hour of tense, silent work, a green light flickered on the comms panel. That's the best I can do, Elias said, wiping grease and sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. It's a wide-beam transmission, unencrypted. Anyone within a few million clicks should pick it up. Let's hope someone's listening. He sat back down at the controls and began broadcasting their distress call, repeating their ship's designation, their last known location, and a stark, simple warning. This is ore hauler Stray Dog, registry number 77B. We are broadcasting on all frequencies. Hephaestus Station on Asteroid 16. Psyche has been destroyed. I repeat, Hephaestus Station has been lost with all hands. We are the sole survivors. We were attacked by an unknown hostile entity, non-biological. Appears to be a form of self-replicating nanotechnology. It is assimilating. I repeat, assimilating all organic and inorganic matter. It is extremely dangerous. We have proof. Do not approach the coordinates of Hephaestus Station. Acknowledge. They sent the message over and over, their voices growing hoarse, the words echoing in the cramped cockpit, a desperate prayer cast into the uncaring void for hours. The only reply was the static of empty space. Hope began to curdle into despair. Maybe no one was out there. Maybe they were truly alone. Then, a sharp ping from the proximity detector. A single contact, moving fast. On an intercept course. Elias zoomed in on the signature. It was a military vessel, its transponder identifying it as the United Defense Fleet Patrol Cutter Vigilance. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made his knees buckle washed over Elias. "We did it! Jorik!" he breathed. "They heard us." A crisp professional voice crackled over the comm. "Unidentified vessel. This is Captain Eva Rostova of the UDF Vigilance. You are broadcasting a non-standard distress signal in a restricted military patrol sector. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded for inspection." Elias's relief evaporated, replaced by a cold spike of frustration. "Captain Rostova, this is Elias Thorne of the Stray Dog. We are not pirates. We are survivors. You need to listen to us. There's a hostile force out here, something we've never seen before. Hephaestus Station is gone." The captain's voice was like ice. "Mr. Thorne, I have a derelict ore hauler with a jury-rigged transmitter screaming about monsters. You will cut your engines, or we will cut them for you. You have 30 seconds. On the main viewer, the Vigilance resolved from a point of light into a sleek, gray predator of a ship, its weapon ports glowing with menacing energy. "She's not listening!" Jorik growled, his hand instinctively going to the rivet gun still strapped to his leg. "Eli, we can't let them take us. They don't know what they're dealing with." Elias's mind was racing. Arguing was pointless. Running was suicide. They had to make her see. Jorik could get that data chip into the broadcast buffer. Now, he commanded. "Captain," he said into the comm, his voice steady and calm. "I understand your skepticism. I wouldn't believe me either. But I am sending you a data packet. It's the security log from my station. Just watch the last 5 minutes. That's all I ask. Please, for the love of God, just watch it. You are in violation of a direct order. Mr. Thorne, this is your final warning. The packet is sent. Captain." Elias cut in, his voice ringing with an authority she couldn't ignore. "Do what you will with us, but watch the damned footage." He cut his engines. The stray dog falling silent and still in the void. He had played his last card. On the bridge of the Vigilance, Captain Eva Rostova watched the ragged ore hauler on her main screen. Her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. She was a career officer, a woman who believed in regulations, order, and the clear, unambiguous lines of command. This situation was messy, and she didn't like it. "Comms, did we receive a data packet?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Aye, Captain," a young ensign replied. "It's quarantined. Standard procedure for an unsecured transmission. Scan it for malware, then put it on the main screen," she ordered. Her first officer, Commander Valerius, a tall, severe-looking man, raised an eyebrow. "Captain, surely you don't intend to indulge this person?" He's clearly unstable. He's either a very bad liar or he's terrified out of his mind, Rostova countered, her eyes never leaving the stray dog. In either case, I want to know why. Put it on screen. The footage flickered to life, displaying a dozen different camera angles from within a mining station. The quality was poor, degraded by the wide-beam transmission, but the horror was crystal clear. The bridge crew of the Vigilance watched in stunned silence. They saw the black, shimmering substance crawling over the station's hull. They heard the panicked, cut-off screams over the internal comms. They witnessed the moment a crewman, a doctor, according to the timestamp, was swarmed by black tendrils, his body contorting, breaking, and reforming into a twitching, faceless horror. The clinical and sterile atmosphere of the military bridge was shattered, replaced by a thick, horrified silence. An ensign in the back of the room made a choking sound and turned away, his face pale green. Valerius stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape, all his smug certainty gone, replaced by a look of profound shock. Rostova felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's life support. She had seen combat. She had seen death. But this was something else entirely. This was an extinction-level event captured on a grainy security camera. This was the abyss staring back. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the comm control. The voice of the mechanic, Thorn, no longer sounded like the ravings of a madman. It sounded like the first toll of a funeral bell for the human race. "Thorn," she began, her own voice strained. This is... She couldn't find the words. Before she could, a piercing alarm blared across the bridge. "Captain!" the tactical officer shouted, his voice cracking with alarm. Multiple contacts emerging from the asteroid belt. 10. No. 20 of them. No transponders. No registry. They're moving fast. Too fast for civilian ships. Rustova's head snapped toward the tactical display. A swarm of red icons was pouring out of the asteroid belt, streaking towards their position. But they weren't ships. Not in the traditional sense. Long-range scans were coming in, and the readings were impossible. They were fragments of the asteroid field, chunks of rock and derelict station parts, all encased in that same shimmering black substance, all moving with a terrifying, unified purpose, propelled by engines that seemed to have grown organically from their corrupted hulls. At the head of the swarm was a larger contact, one that made Rostova's blood run cold. It was the remains of Hephaestus Station, now a grotesque, weaponized hive, its mining lasers and ore processors twisted into weapons of alien design. The Scourge hadn't just destroyed the station, it had turned it into a warship. And it was leading an army of assimilated debris straight for them. Rostova looked from the horrifying fleet on her tactical screen to the small, battered ore hauler floating silently before her ship. The two survivors, the two heralds of the apocalypse. She opened a channel, her voice now stripped of all protocol, a cold, hard knot of fear and fury in her throat. "Thorn," she said, the single word carrying the weight of their new, terrible reality. "What have you brought to our doorstep?" The silence of space was broken by the roar of corrupted engines as the Hive fleet accelerated, its intent clear and unambiguous. It wasn't just hunting the stray dog, it was expanding. And the UDF Vigilance was the first thing standing in its way. The bridge of the Vigilance became a symphony of controlled chaos. Alarms blared, officers shouted reports, and the calm, Sterile air of a routine patrol was ripped away, replaced by the electric tang of imminent life-or-death combat. Captain Rostova stood like a rock in the swirling currents of activity, her eyes flicking between the tactical display showing the approaching swarm and the main viewer where the grotesque hive ship that had once been HFY Station loomed, a monument to their new, horrifying enemy. "Full power to the shields," she barked, her voice cutting through the noise like a plasma blade. "Charge the main railgun battery. Target their lead vessel, the corrupted station. I want to hit them with everything we have before they get in range. Valerius, launch all fighter squadrons. Their orders are to run interference. Break up that swarm. Prioritize any smaller vessels showing weapon signatures. On board the Stray Dog." Elias and Jorich watched the military cutter spring to life, its sleek hull suddenly bristling with weapon emplacements they hadn't even seen before. "They're going to fight them," Yorick breathed, a note of awe in his voice. "They're actually going to fight." Elias felt a surge of grim satisfaction, but it was quickly tempered by the sheer, overwhelming number of the enemy. The Vigilance was a patrol cutter, a wolf designed to hunt lone pirates and smugglers, not a battleship meant to take on an entire fleet. "They're outnumbered and outgunned," Elias said, his hands flying across his own console, bringing the Stray Dog's meager systems back online. "That big one, the station, it's not just a ship. It's a factory. It's probably creating more of those smaller ones as we speak." A new voice, sharp and laced with static, crackled over their comms. It was Rostova. "Thorn, I'm sending you the coordinates for a fallback position. Get your ship out of here. We'll hold them off for as long as we can." Elias gritted his teeth. "With all due respect, Captain, we're not running. You have no idea what you're up against. Their weapons aren't conventional. They don't just destroy. They convert. That black stuff. Those nanites. They'll eat right through your shields and your hull. You need to keep your distance. Use kinetic weapons. Anything that relies on energy seems to get absorbed. We are a United Defense Fleet warship. Mr. Thorn." Rostova's voice was tight with pride and stress. "We know how to fight." "You don't know how to fight this," Elias shot back, his frustration boiling over. "Look at their formation. There's no logic to it. No strategy. They're like a pack of animals. A tide. You can't outmaneuver a tide." The first shots of the battle were fired. The Vigilance's main railgun unleashed a torrent of tungsten slugs at hypersonic velocity. The projectiles slammed into the corrupted HFY station, the impacts creating massive, kinetic explosions that ripped away huge chunks of the twisted metal and rock. For a moment, it looked like a devastating blow. But then, to the horror of everyone watching, the gaping wounds began to heal. The black nanite substance flowed like a tide of living ink, pulling the debris back, sealing the breaches. The station's form shifting and regenerating before their eyes. In response, the Hive ship unleashed a weapon of its own. It wasn't a laser or a missile, but a stream of the black. Liquid nanites, a spear of consuming darkness that shot across the void at incredible speed. It struck the Vigilance's forward shield, and instead of deflecting, the energy of the shield began to visibly drain, a shimmering cascade of light being siphoned directly into the nanite stream, which pulsed and writhed as it fed. "Captain, shield integrity is dropping at 20% per second," the tactical officer yelled, his voice strained with disbelief. "The nanites are draining our power." Rostova's face was pale, But her resolve was iron. Rotate shield frequencies. Fire point defense lasers. Don't let that stream touch the hull. At the same time, the smaller vessels of the swarm, the assimilated asteroids and ship fragments, closed in. They didn't have energy weapons. They were a fleet of battering rams, their surfaces covered in sharp, crystalline growths and organic-looking spikes. The UDF fighters, sleek, advanced craft, met them head-on, their pulse cannons tearing into the corrupted rock. But for every one they destroyed, 2 more would take its place, and the debris from the destroyed ones would often be reassimilated by the larger vessels, the Scourge recycling its own fallen soldiers in the heat of battle. Aboard the Stray Dog, Elias watched the battle unfold with a growing sense of dread. Rostova's crew was brave, disciplined, and utterly outmatched. They were fighting a disease, not an army. "We have to help them," Yorick said, his voice a low growl. "How?" Elias countered, gesturing at the pathetic state of their ship. "We've got no weapons, no shields. We're a tin can in a shooting gallery. But we've got this," Yorick said, pointing at the ship's main drive. A heavily modified, oversized fusion engine Elias had installed himself, a temperamental beast capable of generating a massive, short-lived energy burst if you knew how to push it. And Elias knew. He had used it once to blast a path through a dense ice field, the directed energy pulse acting like a battering ram of pure heat and radiation. An idea, desperate and insane, began to form in his mind. "It might kill us," Elias said, his eyes gleaming with a mad light. "It'll probably tear this ship apart." "Better than letting those things get to us," Yorick said, his expression grimly resolute. Elias nodded. He opened a channel to the Vigilance. "Captain Rostova, you need to break off your attack. Now, get your fighters clear and pull back. I have an idea, but you need to give me a clear shot at the Hive ship. We are not retreating. Thorn." Rostova's voice was a ragged shout over the sounds of explosions rocking her bridge. "We're losing shield integrity on the portside hull breach on Deck 5. You don't have a choice," Elias roared back. "Your weapons aren't working. It's regenerating. I'm going to overload my engine core and vent the plasma directly at it. It's the only thing I can think of that might disrupt the nanites on a massive scale. But if you're in the way, you'll be vaporized too." There was a moment of silence from the Vigilance, a pause filled with the screech of tortured metal and the distant cries of dying men. Then Rostova's voice, stripped of all pride, came back, low and desperate. "Do it." Elias took a deep breath. "Yorick, get back here and strap in. This is going to be a rough ride." He began to work the controls, his hands a blur, bypassing safety protocols, shunting all the ship's power into the engine's core. The lights in the cockpit died. The life support systems coughed and went silent, and the entire ship began to vibrate violently, the hull groaning under the strain. On the console, a temperature gauge climbed rapidly into the red, a wailing alarm signal screaming its protest. Outside, the Stray Dog's main engine began to glow, a small, artificial sun being born in the heart of the rusty ore hauler. The Vigilance, its hull now pockmarked with impacts and bleeding atmosphere from a dozen small breaches, began to pull back, its point defense guns still firing desperately to keep the smaller swarm vessels at bay. Its fighters, what was left of them, broke off their attacks and boosted away. The Scourge fleet, sensing victory, surged forward, ignoring the retreating warship and focusing all its attention on the small, glowing ship that was now pulsing with an incredible amount of energy. The Hive ship, HFY Station, opened its mouth, a gaping maw in its corrupted hull, preparing to fire another stream of consuming nanites. Now or never, Elias muttered, his teeth clenched, his body pressed back into his seat by the incredible G-forces of the vibrating ship. He aimed the stray dog's nose directly at the center of the Hive ship and slammed his hand down on the emergency plasma vent control. A torrent of pure, white-hot plasma, a wave of raw fusion energy, erupted from the stray dog's engine. It was not a beam, but a wave, a tsunami of solar fire that washed over the vanguard of the Scourge fleet. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. The smaller vessels, the assimilated asteroids, were not just destroyed, they were vaporized, their corrupted forms dissolving into superheated gas. The nanites, the black, creeping plague, seemed to recoil from the intense heat and radiation, their cohesive structure breaking down under the onslaught of pure, chaotic energy. The wave of plasma slammed into the Hive ship. The regenerating flesh of the corrupted station boiled and burned, huge sections of it sloughing off in fiery chunks. The nanite stream it had been about to fire dissipated into nothingness. The creature that was HFY Station let out a silent scream, not of sound, but of energy, a psychic shriek that Elias felt in the very marrow of his bones. Inside the stray dog, the world was fire and thunder. The ship was thrown backwards by the force of its own weapon, tumbling end over end through space. The cockpit was a shower of sparks and shattered consoles. Elias was slammed against his restraints, his vision going black for a moment. When his senses returned, the ship was dark and silent, adrift, its power completely gone. Through the cracked viewport, he could see the aftermath of his desperate gamble. The Scourge fleet was in disarray. Half of the smaller vessels were gone, and the great Hive ship was grievously wounded, its forward section a molten, glowing slag heap. It was no longer advancing. It was hurt, and it was afraid. For the first time, the enemy showed something other than relentless, mindless aggression. It showed self-preservation. Slowly, ponderously, the Hive ship began to turn, its remaining swarm ships clustering around it like pilotfish around a wounded shark. It was retreating, limping back towards the asteroid belt. They had won. They had actually won. A weak, sputtering laugh escaped Elias's lips, a sound that was half relief, half insanity. "Yorick," he rasped, his throat raw. "You still with me?" A low groan answered him from the co-pilot's seat. "I think I broke something." Yorick mumbled, "But I'm alive." A blinking light on a single, still functioning panel caught Elias's eye. It was the comms. A channel was open. Captain Rostova's voice, filled with a mixture of shock, awe, and something that might have been respect, filled the dead cockpit. "Thorn, what in God's name did you just do?" Elias leaned his head back against the seat, the adrenaline draining away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. He looked at the retreating enemy, a dark tide receding back into the shadows. They had survived the battle, but he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the war was just beginning. "I gave them a bloody nose," he whispered, more to himself than to the captain. "And I think I just made them very, very angry." The aftermath of the battle was a field of silent, glittering debris. The void around the UDF Vigilance was a graveyard of shattered rock and vaporized alien constructs, a testament to the ferocity of the brief, brutal engagement. Inside the ship, the chaos of combat had been replaced by the grim, methodical work of damage control. Medics moved through the corridors with plasma torches to seal microfractures in the hull and administered pain suppressants to the wounded, their faces grim masks of professional calm. On the bridge, Captain Rostova stared at the tactical display, where the last of the red icons representing the Scourge fleet vanished back into the sensor-ghosting clutter of the asteroid belt. They were gone. For now. But the image of the Hive ship regenerating, of its nanite weapon drinking her shields dry, was burned into her mind. She turned her attention to the small, dark shape of the stray dog, tumbling dead in space, a wisp of smoke or venting gas curling from its ruptured engine housing. A single act of desperate, suicidal ingenuity from a civilian junker had done more to repel the enemy than her entire arsenal of advanced military hardware. It was a humbling, terrifying thought. "Commander Valerius," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Dispatch a recovery team. Bring that ship and its crew aboard. Treat them as civilian consultants, not prisoners. Give them full access to our medical facilities." Valerius, his uniform singed in a fresh cut across his brow, simply nodded, his earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by a somber respect. "And get me a secure priority channel to Titan Command," she added. "Tell them I am invoking Protocol 0. Send them Thorn's data packet. They need to see what we're facing. The entire system needs to know." A shuttle from the Vigilance clamped onto the stray dog's hull with a magnetic thud. Elias and Yorick, battered and bruised, were helped from their wrecked cockpit by a team of Marines in full combat armor, their rifles held at a low ready, their faces unreadable behind their polarized visors, as they were escorted through the clean, brightly lit corridors of the warship. Elias felt a profound sense of dislocation. The quiet efficiency, the crisp uniforms, the very air, which tasted clean and free of the metallic tang of recycled life support, felt more alien to him than the monstrosities they had just fought. He was a creature of grease and rust, of improvised repairs and cutting corners to survive. This was a world of order and protocol, a world he had left behind 2 decades ago. They were taken to the med bay, a pristine white room that smelled of antiseptic and sterilized metal. Yorick, it turned out, had 3 broken ribs and a concussion. He was sedated and put on a diagnostic bed, his massive frame finally still. Elias's injuries were minor, deep bruises and a few cuts, but the ship's doctor, a stern woman with tired eyes, insisted on scanning him anyway. As he sat on the edge of a bio bed, a Marine stood guard at the door, a silent, armored sentinel. He wasn't a prisoner, but he wasn't free either. He was an asset, a piece of a puzzle they were desperately trying to solve. After he was cleared by the doctor, he was escorted not to a holding cell, but to an officer's briefing room. Captain Rostova was waiting for him, alone. She stood before a large holographic display that was replaying the battle from the Vigilance's tactical logs. "Mr. Thorn," she said, without preamble, her eyes never leaving the display. "Your engine modification, that plasma discharge, it wasn't standard. It wasn't even sane. Explain it." Elias rubbed his tired eyes. "It's a junker's trick. Overload the magnetic containment field in the fusion core. You get a massive, uncontrolled plasma burst. Most ships would just explode. The stray dog has a reinforced engine housing and oversized plasma vents. I built it to crack asteroids, not to fight a war. Rostova turned to face him, her expression a mixture of grudging admiration and professional concern. You fought a war today, Mr. Thorn, and you may have just saved all our lives. Titan Command is mobilizing your data, your warning. It's being taken very seriously. Fleet assets are being redirected from across the system. It won't be enough, Elias said, his voice flat. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a cold, heavy certainty. You saw how it regenerated. You saw how it turned our own station into a weapon. You can't just shoot this thing. It learns. It adapts. Today, we used a plasma wave. What happens next time when it comes back with energy dampeners or ablative armor that can handle the heat? Rostova's lips thinned. He was right. He was a mechanic, a civilian. But he understood the nature of this new enemy in a way her military training had not prepared her for. They were fighting a sentient virus, and every battle was just teaching it how to become more virulent. "Then what do you suggest?" she asked. The question a genuine request for insight. How do we fight an enemy that turns our own strength against us? Elias walked over to the holographic display, which now showed a schematic of the corrupted HFY station pieced together from the Vigilance's sensor data. "We don't fight it," he said, pointing to the glowing core of the Hive ship. "We cure it, or we kill the source." That black stuff, the nanites, they're not just a weapon. They're the organism itself. The ships, the creatures that were my crew, they're just puppets, extensions of a central intelligence, a hive mind. And that, his finger tapped the schematic, is the brain. A single point of failure, Rostov mused, her tactical mind immediately grasping the implication. If we can destroy the core intelligence, the rest of the body dies. Elias finished, but getting to it is the problem. It will defend its core above all else. A frontal assault is suicide. You'd need a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. A silence fell over the room as the weight of their situation settled in. They had a strategy, a ghost of a chance, but they lacked the means. The fleets of the United Defense Force were powerful, but they were built for conventional warfare, for ship-to-ship combat. This required something different. This required sabotage, infiltration, a targeted strike against the heart of the beast. Their conversation was interrupted by the chime of the door. Commander Valerius entered, his face grim. "Captain, we've received a priority, one message from Titan. They're assembling a rapid response fleet at the main naval base. They want a full debrief." And he paused, looking at Elias. "They want Mr. Thorn. They're sending a high-speed courier ship to retrieve him." Rostova looked at Elias, a complex expression on her face. "It seems your days as a junker are over. Mr. Thorn, you're about to be conscripted." Elias felt a surge of resentment. He didn't want to be a soldier. He didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to go back to his quiet life of fixing broken things. But that life was gone, consumed by the black tide. He thought of Anya, of Eris, of the 11 friends he had lost. His resentment hardened into resolve. He had started this, not by choice, but by circumstance. He would see it through to the end. "Fine," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "But I have conditions." Rostova raised an eyebrow. "You're in no position to make demands." "I want my ship back," Elias stated. The stray dog. I want it repaired, refitted, and armed. And I want my crewman, Jorik, with me. He's the only other person in this system who's seen these things up close. And one more thing. I want access to your shipyards, your labs, your best engineers. If we're going to kill this thing, I need to build a weapon that can do the job. Rostova stared at him for a long moment. Then a slow, thin smile touched her lips. It was the first time Elias had seen her show any emotion other than stern command. "Mr. Thorn," she said, "I think this is the beginning of a very interesting partnership." The journey to Titan, humanity's largest and most fortified off-world colony, was a blur. Elias spent the time in a feverish state of creation, working with the Vigilance's chief engineer, a brilliant but perpetually stressed woman named Lena, sketching out designs on a datapad. He wasn't designing a missile or a torpedo. He was designing a virus. "The Scourge nanites are builders," he explained, his hands moving rapidly, drawing complex diagrams of molecular structures. "They assimilate and repurpose matter at the atomic level, but their programming must have a core directive, a set of rules. If we can introduce a counter-command, a self-destruct code, we can turn their own nature against them." Lena was skeptical at first, but as she listened to Elias's intuitive, almost organic understanding of machinery and programming, her skepticism turned to fascination. He didn't think like an engineer, he thought like an artist, seeing the flow of energy, the harmony of systems. When they arrived at Titan, the moon was a hive of activity. Its orbital space was crowded with warships of every class, from massive dreadnoughts to nimble squadrons of interceptors. The naval base, a sprawling complex built into the moon's icy crust, was on high alert. Elias was immediately whisked away to a meeting with the Fleet Admiralty, a council of grim-faced, decorated officers who listened to his story with a mixture of horror and disbelief. He presented his plan, his theory of a central intelligence, and his proposal for a logic bomb, a targeted weapon designed not to explode, but to deliver a fatal counterprogram to the Scourge's core. "It's insane," one admiral scoffed. "You want to fly a single, modified junk hauler into the heart of an enemy fleet based on a half-baked theory. It's the only theory we have that explains how they operate." A new voice cut in. Captain Rostova had entered the room, her presence commanding immediate respect. "I fought them. I saw what they can do. Our conventional tactics are a liability. Thorn's plan is a long shot, but it's a better shot than sending our fleets to be assimilated one by one." The debate raged, but Rostova's testimony, combined with the chilling footage from Hep House Station, was enough to sway the council. They agreed to give Elias his chance. He was given a top-secret research lab, a team of the fleet's best engineers and programmers, and, most importantly, the wreck of the stray dog. As he stood in the vast shipyard, looking at the battered, scorched hull of his old ship, he felt a strange sense of homecoming. He had spent his life fixing things that were broken. Now, he had to fix a broken world. Jorik, his ribs bandaged and his head clear, stood beside him, his massive presence a comforting anchor in the storm. "You really think we can do this?" "Eli," he asked, his voice low. Elias looked at the stray dog, then out at the star-dusted blackness of space, where the enemy was waiting, healing, and undoubtedly learning. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we're damn sure going to try." The race was on. While the fleet prepared for a massive, system-wide defensive operation, Elias and his small team worked around the clock, turning a rusty ore hauler into a scalpel sharp enough to cut the heart out of a god. The shipyard on Titan became Elias's entire world. Days and nights blurred into a continuous cycle of work, fueled by stimulants and a gnawing, ever-present urgency. The stray dog was stripped to its frame, its old temperamental systems replaced with cutting-edge military hardware. But Elias insisted on keeping the core of the ship, its soul, intact. He personally oversaw the modification of the engine, reinforcing the plasma vents and installing a custom-built focusing array. His insane, ship-killing weapon was being refined into a surgical instrument of immense power. The rest of the team, led by Lena, focused on the logic bomb. They worked in a sealed, high-security lab, analyzing the microscopic samples of the scourge nanites recovered from the Vigilance's hull. They were miracles of alien engineering, part machine, part biological organism, communicating through quantum entanglement. Cracking their code was like trying to decipher the language of God. "They're not just programmed," Lena said, her eyes red-rimmed from staring at holographic molecular models for 30 hours straight. "They're symbiotic. There's a master-slave relationship. The core intelligence broadcasts a continuous signal, a song, and every nanite, every assimilated creature, harmonizes with it. If we can change the song, we can make the whole choir sing itself to death." Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While analyzing the nanites' power consumption, they discovered a vulnerability: the assimilation process. The conversion of matter into more scourge material required a colossal amount of energy, an amount that couldn't be sustained internally. "It has to be drawing power from somewhere else," Elias reasoned, pacing the lab like a caged wolf. "A tether, an external source." They scoured the sensor logs from the battle, cross-referencing them with deep space telemetry, and found it a faint, almost undetectable energy signature trailing from the Hive ship, a phantom cord stretching back into the dark of the asteroid belt. The Scourge wasn't just a fleet, it was a parasite, latched onto a hidden power source, a heart beating somewhere in the deep black. This changed everything. Their logic bomb now had a delivery system. It didn't need to be a physical weapon. It could be a virus, a mimetic code piggybacked onto the Scourge's own power stream. If they could get close enough to the Hive ship to tap into that stream, they could upload their countersong directly into the enemy's central nervous system. The plan was codenamed Operation Orpheus. The main UDF fleet, under the command of a newly promoted Admiral Rostova, would launch a massive diversionary attack, drawing the bulk of the Scourge forces into a decisive battle near Saturn's rings. While the fleets clashed, a single, small ship would slip through the chaos, hunt down the Hive ship, and deliver the killing blow. That ship, of course, was the Stray Dog. It was no longer just an ore hauler. It was a ghost, its hull coated in radar-absorbent paint, its heat signature baffled, its profile designed to mimic a piece of drifting debris. Yorick, now fully recovered, was its co-pilot and gunner, his station retrofitted with a suite of advanced sensor jammers and point defense cannons. Elias was its pilot, its surgeon, the man who would guide the scalpel. As they stood on the gantry, preparing to board for the final mission, Rostova met them, her admiral's uniform looking strange and formal on the woman he had first met as an embattled captain. "The fleet will buy you time," "Thorn," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion except grim determination. "But we can't hold them forever. Don't miss." Elias simply nodded. He looked at Yorick, who gave him a solid, reassuring clap on the shoulder. They climbed aboard their new ship, the ramp hissing shut behind them, sealing them into their shared destiny. The stray dog launched in silence, a black knife slipping away from the moon's gravity, its engines running cold as it accelerated into the darkness. The hours that followed were the most tense of Elias's life. They flew through the outer system, a ghost in the machine, listening to the encrypted fleet comms that painted a terrifying picture of the battle raging near Saturn. Rostova's fleet was taking heavy losses, sacrificing ships and lives to create the opening they needed. The Scourge, larger and more aggressive than before, fought with a savage, coordinated fury. It had learned from its last encounter. Its ships were now shielded against kinetic attacks, and they used their nanite streams with terrifying precision, disabling and consuming UDF cruisers with horrifying efficiency. Finally, their moment came. Long-range sensors detected the Hive ship holding back from the main battle, surrounded by a phalanx of elite guards, its energy tether a shimmering, invisible umbilical cord stretching back into the blackness. "There you are, you son of a bitch," Elias whispered. He engaged the stealth drive, and the stray dog became a whisper, a ripple in the fabric of space-time. They crept closer, moving through the debris of the raging battle, the flashes of distant explosions lighting their cockpit in strobing. Apocalyptic bursts. They dodged patrols, navigated minefields of corrupted debris, and held their breath every time a Scourge vessel swept the area with its sensors. They were 100 kilometers from the Hive ship when an alarm blared. They had been spotted. A squadron of smaller, faster Scourge interceptors broke off from the main guard and swooped in, their forms like twisted, obsidian insects. "They're on us!" Jorik yelled, his hands flying across the gunnery controls. "Hold on!" Elias snarled, pushing the stray dog into a gut-wrenching, evasive maneuver, the ship bucking and groaning as he weaved through a dense field of ice asteroids. The next few minutes were a blur of chaos and violence. Jorik's point defense cannon spat streams of white-hot plasma, slicing through the interceptors with deadly accuracy. Elias flew like a madman, using the asteroid field as cover, his junker instincts, his innate feel for the ship, serving him better than any flight computer ever could. They destroyed the interceptors, but not before one of them scored a lucky hit. A crystalline spike tearing a gash in their port side, crippling their stealth drive. They were blind, exposed, and the Hive ship itself was now turning its attention towards them. "The energy tether is 50 clicks ahead," Jorik reported, his voice tight. "We're not going to make it before that big bastard gets a lock on us. We only need to get close enough," Elias said, his eyes wild. He rerouted all remaining power to the forward emitters. "Lena, are you ready? Back on Titan." In the safety of the command center, Lena's voice came through the comm, clear and steady. "The virus is primed, Elias. We just need a clean injection into the power stream. Get me within 5,000 meters. 5,000 it is." Elias grunted. He turned the stray dog and flew directly at the approaching Hive ship, a tiny gnat charging a monstrous, otherworldly bull. The Hive ship fired its main nanite weapon. A river of black death surged towards them. "Jorik, give me everything you've got," Elias commanded. Jorik fired the main cannons, not at the ship, but at the nanite stream itself. The plasma bursts, disrupting the cohesive flow for a precious few seconds. It wasn't enough. The stream was going to hit them. At the last possible moment, Elias did the only thing he could think of. He fired his own weapon. He vented the engine plasma, not in a wide, uncontrolled wave, but in a tight, focused beam, a lance of pure solar fire. The two streams met in a cataclysmic explosion of energy that lit up the void. The stray dog was thrown violently, its systems screaming in protest, every alarm on the board flashing red. But they were through. They were inside the weapon's effective range, coasting on momentum, their ship a dead, broken thing. Through the cracked viewport, Elias could see the energy tether, a shimmering, almost invisible thread of power just ahead. Now, Lena, now, he screamed into the comm. In the Titan command center, Lena's fingers flew across her console. Uploading. The virus is away. A packet of pure information, a mimetic plague, shot from the stray dog's emitters, crossed the remaining distance, and merged with the Scourge's power stream. For a moment, nothing happened. The Hive ship continued its advance, its weapon ports glowing as it prepared to finish them off. Then it stopped. A shudder ran through its massive and corrupted form. The shimmering black surface began to flicker, its color shifting from obsidian to a sickly, mottled gray. A low, keening sound echoed on all frequencies, a sound of a billion voices screaming in unison. The song had changed. The Master's command was no longer assimilate and build, but consume and die. Across the entire system, the Scourge fleet convulsed. The nanites turned on their hosts. Corrupted ships began to tear themselves apart, their own weapons firing inward. The creatures that had once been human and were now mindless puppets of the Hive, mind simply dissolved, their forms collapsing into pools of inert, gray dust. The great Hive ship, the source of it all, began to crumble, its structure failing as the nanites that held it together consumed each other in a chain reaction of self-destruction. It broke apart in a slow, silent, beautiful apocalypse, a dying god returning to dust. On the stray dog, Elias and Jorik watched in stunned silence, their broken ship adrift in the sudden, quiet peace. They had done it. It was over. A week. Crackling voice came over the comm. It was Rostova. Thorn, Jorik, report. Elias leaned forward, his body aching, his spirit soaring. Admiral, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. The garbage is taken out. We're gonna need a tow. In the weeks that followed, Elias, Thorn, and Jorik became reluctant heroes. They were offered medals, commissions, fortunes. They turned them all down. The stray dog, once again, was repaired, this time with the best technology the grateful UDF could provide. Elias stood in the familiar cockpit, the engines humming a steady, healthy tune, the recycled air tasting, for the first time in his life, like freedom. So, where to now? Boss, Jorik asked, settling into the co-pilot's seat as if he'd been born there. Elias looked out at the starfield, no longer a place of cold, indifferent darkness, but a vast, open frontier, a universe of things to be fixed, of places to explore. The rust never slept, and out there, in the deep black, there was always something broken, waiting for a junker with good hands and a stubborn heart to come along and make it whole again. I don't know, Elias said, and for the first time, the thought didn't scare him. He pushed the throttle forward, and the stray dog surged ahead, a small, ugly, beautiful ship sailing into the endless possibilities of the quiet dawn.